Hello and welcome to this video. Anybody who's watched this channel for any amount of time will know that beyond all the top tens and silly videos about bands that get on my nerves, I've explored the fundamental meaning as best I can of music and art, why we have it, what makes it good, and I've really come to a conclusion after a lifetime of doing music and teaching it, and also I started off as a painter, so I started off in the art world, trying to do that. That art is about trying to balance two things that are within us, and that can be seen as relating to the dialectic in philosophy, but it could also be seen as relating to the hemispheres in the brain. Because of this interest, I was drawn to the writings and thoughts of Dr. Iain McGILCHRIST, who is one of the most famous scientists in the world. You may well have seen him. He's been interviewed by everybody from Jordan Peterson through to John Cleese. It's incredible, the reach of his ideas. And I think the reason is because his exploration and interpretation of how the brain hemispheres work, which is contrary to the established idea of the sort of Apollonian, the Dionysian chaos and order and all that type of stuff. His view is far more nuanced, and he has shown an incredible awareness and appreciation of the arts. I suggest you pop over to his website. The link is down below, and check out there, because there's not just all these thoughts on how the brain works, but there's daily poetry readings. There's all sorts of discussion about the nature of art. So as soon as I started to read his stuff and watch all the interviews online and get drawn into his incredible ideas, I thought, I want to interview this guy on my channel. And so I never thought I could pull it off, but I have. So I'm only a little channel, and I can't believe he's on here, but this is a real superstar thinker, an appreciator of beauty, and an exponent of love. And this conversation is one of the best conversations I've ever had. I do apologise if I get a bit fired up by what he's saying, and of course, you know me, I do butt in every now and then, but it's only because I was so fired up by the conversation, and it really was a conversation. I came to this with no questions. We hit record virtually straight away, and what you're going to hear is a conversation between a philosopher, a psychologist, whatever you want to call him, and a rock drummer, a painter, a musician, a YouTuber, me. And it's a conversation between two people that are from two different worlds. But we can see with this conversation, those worlds aren't as different as we think. And the explanation could well be in the discoveries about the mind and the brain that Dr. Iain McGILCHRIST has been able to reveal to the world, which has made him the man he is. So, without further ado, let's just get straight in with this interview with Dr. Iain McGILCHRIST. Have you had a good day today, Dr. McGILCHRIST?
Well, it's been a very interesting day. And I gather you were a painter.
Yes, originally, yes.
Yes, and it's been the last day of 7 days of having my portrait painted by an amazing artist from Long Island, New York, who came over here with his wife and 4 children entirely at his expense, and stayed in the village where I am to paint my portrait and give it to me. And so that has been both, a completely new experience and quite an eye-opener, really. Just watching him working and seeing how sometimes the very tiniest line can make a difference and so on. So, yeah.
And so has he allowed you to watch the construction of this portrait, or has he kept it a surprise?
No. All along he said it's okay to look at it. And I was pretty amazed after the first day, because I knew there was a lot of sketching out of outlines and so on. But even at the end of the day, there was something like a picture of a person sitting there. And it's just got better and better, and it's been a great experience. So there we are. That's been pretty much the entire day today. Yeah.
In the hierarchy of painting, portraiture was often seen as being quite high up, higher than landscape painting. This is the sort of old established way of seeing art. And I think there's some truth there, because when you paint a portrait, to capture the person requires drawing two things together, I believe, as a painter. It's not enough to just follow the sort of the lines of the person's face. You know, if you trace it, it might not capture. So you're trying to balance two things, which I would say is often in art described as form and content.
Yes.
Now, my experience as being originally a painter, then a musician, every time I think about what I'm trying to do or somebody else is trying to do, it arrives at this sort of, you could call it a dialectic, or you could call it yin and yang. There's always two things that you're trying to draw together.
Yes.
And many years ago, I came up with the idea. I thought that sometimes, you know, the idea of the peak experience of Maslow. Obviously, you do, because you know way more about it than me. But this idea of the peak experience, the sublime, is almost like the drawing together. Every now and then, there's a glimpse through art of these two things being drawn together, and the artists and musicians. So, for example, if you're performing a piece of music, you're trying to play that music as well as you possibly can and not make mistakes. And there's a whole sort of almost like a moral order there to must not make mistakes. But at the same time, you're trying to play it with an abandon or hedonistic, visceral expression.
Yes.
And many years ago, in thinking about this, I thought this must be to do with the way human beings reach out into the world. It's the reaching out into the world which is an expression of who we are, and within that there's two ways of seeing the world, and we're human beings. We see the world in that framework, and it's very difficult to bring them together. And I thought, I wonder if art is the sort of thing that human beings have created to try and draw these two things together, which, when they're not together, are actually very useful. Then I came across your work, and I had no idea about brain hemispheres. I had the usual thing that, you know, there's, you know, that sort of like the devil and the angel, whatever it is. So I as soon as I started to you know, read your work and see all the interviews online that you've done, I thought, I just want him to talk about art. I want him to talk about art. I want him to talk about what he's learned. And so the fact that you've spent a day, you know, a few days with an artist painting you, so that's what I want to know. How do you think that relates? How does the structure of the brain relate to the aim of art?
Well, that's a big one, but I think you're right to draw attention to the need to balance at least two things, which are being able to really capture a detail and being able at the same time to see the whole. And Kevin McAvoy, who's the artist, was saying, you know, that so often in his and he went back to Florence and trained in the techniques of Leonardo, and he studied Velázquez and Van Dyck and how they painted portraits and so on. He's got a school of his own in New York. But he was saying that, you know, one of the things is that so often artists don't see the whole. They've done a detail, and they've done another detail, and they've done a bit, but the whole thing is not cohering. And it's a bit late when you've done the details to try and say, well, now I'm going to make it cohere. It has to be cohering from the word go as a whole. And so what I noticed in a very practical way was that he would stand back quite a long way, I would say about 8 feet or something from me and the canvas. And then he would, almost like a hunter, he would be crouching down, he'd see something, and then he'd run in almost and put a mark on the canvas, and then he'd go back again and have a look at it again. So there's this back and forwards between the way where you can see the whole and the detail and how that works. I thought this was A, fascinating, and B, very beautiful. And the other thing that really struck me is how the tiniest thing, just a little bit of white light on something, can completely change it. And this goes very much with my view that the light in which we see something, the metaphorical light in which we see something, changes absolutely what it is that we see. So I found it a very interesting experience, I have to say. And, I have a slightly checkered career in that I started off at Oxford reading literature. My lifelong interest has been philosophy. I then had the leisure for 7 years to think philosophically about the mind-body relationship, and that led me to medicine and real life experience of people where something had changed in their brain and it changed their character, or something happened to them and it changed their body as well. So all of that, and then of course a psychiatrist. So I've been round the houses on all this, and I have to say that, although in our culture there is a sort of view that somehow science will tell us the ultimate truths, I'd like to qualify that by saying science will tell us many, many important truths. And I spend a lot of my life defending science against people who don't like science because they think it'll tell them things that don't agree with their philosophy. And I'm sorry, mate, science is a really important guide. But what it can't do is answer the ultimate questions. And so it's, and good scientists know this, as indeed good people who know how to reason well know that there are limits to reason. Pascal, famous mathematician and philosopher in the 17th century, already said, reason is feeble if it cannot see the limits to reason. And so you can, in a way I have been able to do is to show both the strengths and the limits of various approaches to truth. And I take those in my latest book, The Matter with Things, to be science, reason, intuition and imagination. And intuition and imagination are important for science and mathematics just as much as they are for art. So there's a sort of a bit of an introduction to my thinking about all of that. But where do you like to go?
Well, it's very interesting. I'm trying to remember his name. A few years ago, I was very lucky enough to, and I'll put it in the description, to interview one of the leading quantum physicists in the world. Really new.
Yes.
And he'd spent his. And what I find very interesting with sciencey types is they study everything. They're in the detail, but when somebody's done it for a long time, they too, like the artist, stand back and see the whole. And you can ask them quite general questions. And I said to him, what's going on with quantum physics? Well, we know when you get right to the bottom of it, and you've got this one thing, and then you've got a contradictory going on, and all that type of thing. He said, what is it? And he goes, I don't think it's there. I think it's in us. It's in us. The way that we perceive it is that human beings perceive things in two different ways, and when we get to the limits of the infinitesimally small or the infinitesimally huge, there is a limit, because we are always perceiving everything in these two ways, and they seem to be in opposition. Human history seems to be this is, I think we see it as being almost like we're damned for being like this. Whereas actually it's incredibly useful. This is one of the things I've realized, have you ever seen that TED talk with the lady talks about her stroke?
Jill Bolte Taylor.
Yes, incredible.
Of course, yes. Yes, and indeed, I've met and talked to her, and that's part of a film that was made about my work called The Divided Brain, a feature film, yeah.
Could you explain to our viewers what the point she makes about, as this stroke happens, she, being a scientist with the knowledge, is able to study it while it happens? Can you describe what's actually going on in there? Because when I saw that, I felt this had profound ramifications for how we think about art. And this is what I really wanted to talk to you about.
I think that's right. I mean, I wouldn't put all my money on Jill Bolte Taylor's interpretation of things, but she's a very interesting person and a very brave person and talented, and she in every way. And she What I love about her TED talk is that she says that, she was in the shower and she started to feel these strange things happening, and she thought to herself, because she's a neuroanatomist, she thought, I'm having a right hemisphere stroke. How cool! How cool is that? And so she was able to observe what happened. And I think a lot of things happened over the next months and so on. But she felt in some ways liberated by this, in that constantly analytical and constantly defining aspect of her mind was taking a back seat, really, to the experientially savvy, the phenomenological take on reality. And she saw many things. She saw reality as, in some ways, I hesitate to talk about this because it does sound a little new agey, and I have a bit of a
I have a question in a minute about this for you. This is exactly what I wanted to ask you, because I doubt that as well. I doubt that a lot.
Yes, I doubt it, you see. But I mean, certain aspects of it, she certainly experienced that she saw things as more interconnected than she normally saw them. She saw things with compassion, which is very interesting, I think. So her general attitude was a more compassionately engaged one. And that doesn't necessarily mean that one sees less. It might mean that one actually sees more, as many people have suggested, scientists included, that and philosophers, that it's not necessarily better to be clinically detached from things. That makes you see some things, but it also blots out seeing many things that are central to what it is you're observing. And so a good position is to approach it in a position of a loving acceptance or loving awareness and a willingness to discover. So that's all a little bit airy-fairy for me, because I like to get down to the detail, and I'm not going to go into it now because there's just so much of it.
Well, when I heard her speak about it, the feeling I got was what she's describing is what all my sort of new age friends are trying to get with all their sort of oneness and mindfulness and, going for their gong baths and all this. And they could just have it just by having a stroke. And what they're basically doing is losing what makes human beings incredible, which is our rational ability to see threats, accommodate for the past, accommodate for the future based upon the past. It's this thing of being in the world and reaching out into the world for the fruit. It's symbolized there, but we have to check that fruit's not poison. We have to know it. And I thought,
we do.
And I feel that we have lost something since the Enlightenment. You have the Enlightenment, and then you have that reaction with the sort of romantic era of art and music, where people are going, well, what about this pure experience? That's very powerful on our culture, on Western culture. And then I think we've actually lost our ability to put faith in art, which doesn't go down that new age thing and just says, why don't we just sit there and not worry about the gas bill and, all this, and we could just sit there with our brains switched off, a little bit like, what was it in the Time Machine? Is it the Eloy, the ones that are just sat there,
All right. I don't know.
How much is this based in our humanity, our minds, and how much do you think art actually is pulling together these two things in a much more sophisticated way than these new age airy-fairiness, or the hard science that just says, well, this is all a bit of nonsense,
Well, I think either position is going to miss something. So I think a dismissive attitude to art is foolish and ignorant and will block many insights. On the other hand, what you call the sort of airy-fairy attitude is a big mistake as well.
Yes, I agree.
And I think there are various things to say here that are important. I think one is that our culture has been lopsided in a way that other cultures in the world, notably Far Eastern cultures, have tended not to be. So it has tended to be very, to pay homage only to the mind that can break things up into pieces, and thinks that everything that is real must be measurable in some sort of a way. Now, it's wonderful that some things that are real can be measured, and that's the proper role of science. But it's wrong of science to say that the things that it can't measure don't exist, because there's an awful lot of them, starting with love. And it's fascinating that when I say that, I say, I imagine you've been in love, but it's not something that can be reproduced in the lab or measured. They say, oh, yes, we can measure oxytocin levels in the blood, and we can scan the brain and so on. Yeah. Excuse me, I've been there for a long, long time, but that is not love. That is just biomarkers that are not the nature of love. They aren't the substance of love. They aren't love. They are a proxy, and a very, very, very approximate and ambiguous proxy. So I think that's the point, that an intelligent position holds both. But get this, it's not like, well, one is the left hemisphere and the other is the right hemisphere. It's more like this. The left hemisphere is dogmatic. So it's a dogmatic atheist, or it's a dogmatic fundamentalist, religious fundamentalist. It's a dogmatic rationalist, or it's a dogmatic intuitionist. But the right hemisphere is much, much better able to see the combinations. So it's not like one against the other, left versus right. It's like an either-or basis of an extreme vision in the left hemisphere, or the right hemisphere's take, which is much more balanced. And I think that one of the things to say in defense of Jill Bolte Taylor is that she thinks this too, and thinks it's very important that these things are balanced. And I see that the main problem here is not that somehow we'll overbalance into a sort of right hemisphere extremism. It's almost built into the right hemisphere's view that there cannot be extremism, because it sees the importance of the other. So the right hemisphere understands the importance of the left. The left hemisphere doesn't understand the importance of the right. And it's literally true at an electrophysiological level that the right hemisphere is communicating more with the left than the left is with the right. And the left doesn't understand the values, the point, the purpose of the right hemisphere. But if the right hemisphere understands that the left hemisphere can do some valuable work at a secondary level. So it's very important to maintain this position that one is a master and the other is an emissary, hence the title of my first book. Not my first book, but my first book on this hemisphere topic. And it surprises.
Can you explain that a little bit more? Because
sure,
you put such a precise. I mean, I've watched loads of interviews with you, but just then, I think because we're talking about art, you put such a precise description, and it's different to our intuitive idea that has been received through all sorts of different places, and I'm having to take it in at the moment. So I need you to explain it a little bit more, because.
Yes, okay.
There's a dynamic there, which it does seem to be an empathetic dynamic, which has love within it. If that makes sense, you have the raw data. Then what do you apply to that? Because one of the things I've often stated on my channel is I think that the music and art is made out of love. It's actually made out of it. People, why do they do it? Why does somebody want to sit? Why do I want to talk to you? And why do we want to talk about this? And it's because there's something more than just we want to know the facts.
Yes.
There's a feeling within us. It's a humanity. It's a love that goes out beyond just your kids and your wife or your dog or anything.
Yes.
It's that idea of a greater love. And I think we need to tune into that as human beings. I think it's in art. I'm looking at that painting behind you at the moment, which is I'm not too sure what it is. It's very stark, Turner-esque landscape. And that painter, why are they trying to express that to me? What are they trying to explain about the world in that? Why would they want to do that? It's because we want to make sure that our subjective phenomenological view of the world chimes with somebody else. It's not about
Absolutely.
subject and object. It's not about, the
No,
great division in philosophy. That actually these
no,
things.
no.
I'm trying to get there, Dr. Mill.
Yes,
I think these
yes,
things that what you've
yes,
described is actually would be a much better state of affairs to go. It's not
yes.
one thing or the other. Art
No,
is
no.
important because it's an individual speaking to another individual, but
Yes,
reflecting the
yes,
whole.
yes, yes, that's right. Well, art is, in this way, a remarkable thing in that somebody cared enough and thought that something they could see that couldn't be expressed in just everyday language was so important that they needed to undergo a process of uncertainty in which you are looking for the expression of something, you sense something, you reach out towards it, and gradually, if you attend to it, it comes more and more into being, and that is the work of art. And then what put me off the academic study of it is that too often we take this thing which, if it's any good, is actually unique, so that really if it hadn't existed, nothing else could replace it. It's also embodied and implicit, so that what it's saying is reduced if you put it into words. I often use as an example the wonderful poems Hardy wrote in 1912 and 13 after his wife died. People say, well, what's the content? What do they say? Well, they say that it's extremely painful when somebody you love dies. Well, no prizes for
There's the bleeding
that.
obvious.
Bleeding obvious. So in that sense, once you've paraphrased it, you've diminished it from something enormous to something trite. And the third thing is that the thing becomes substitutable by a paraphrase, by anything else really, and it's lost its uniqueness, it's lost its embodiedness, and it's lost its sense of the context. The context changes everything. The whole makes a difference to every single part that we think of as a part in that whole. So that led me to write a book called Against Criticism, which was really saying that not that there's something wrong with criticism if it's done in the right way, in order to approach tactfully the work of art and sweep out of the way misconceptions that will get between us and our enjoyment and understanding of it. But if it's done in a way which tries to substitute a very, very crude understanding for what was there originally, then it has destroyed a work of art. And for me, that is a great shame. So, yes, I mean, the thing is that people have to put out of their minds, you asked me just to say a few things about the Martian as Hemisphere, the metaphor there. And people need to put out of their minds everything that they think they know about it, unless they've heard it from me. I mean, or one or two other people that live. But the thing is that for a very long time, a lot of nonsense was talked about this. And so it quite rightly got the reputation of being something we shouldn't try to discuss. But because we got the answer wrong to a very important question doesn't mean that trying to find a better answer is a bad idea. And I've spent 30 years trying to find a better answer. I think most people who've accompanied me there think that I have probably found a better answer. So it's not about art versus science, and it's not about reason versus emotion and all those sort of things. It's about a way of looking at the world which is predatory. It's the part of us that needs to get stuff in order to survive, very important evolutionary target, without which it's no good having other refined things, because if you haven't got any food, then no more you. So the left hemisphere in it's not just humans, it's animals, birds, and so on, is in the service of getting stuff by focusing on something that's already familiar and getting it. But the right hemisphere is looking at the whole picture to understand everything else that's going on, including that there's a predator watching you while you're getting your lunch, and looking out for your mate and your offspring. So it's a simple enough idea from an evolutionary point of view, but it makes a big difference to how we see the world. Because if we look at the world with a predatory kind of attention, how can I use this? How can I manipulate it? And it's just a detail, a thing that has no meaning or purpose in itself. That summons up a picture of a world which is rather the picture of Dawkins and Dennett, to use a shorthand. But if you pay a different kind of attention to the world, in which you see the world as composed of things that are interrelated, that their meaning only exists in those relations, that context completely changes things, that the important things about them can't be made explicit but must be understood implicitly, hence the importance of poetry, of music, of painting, architecture, religious myths, narratives, rituals, all these things help us to contact something that can't just be contacted in that very straightforward, logical, simple way. We need to have that, but we mustn't lose the other kind of knowledge. And the best way to use these two together is by favouring the right hemisphere over the left, because, as I show in the matter with things, the right hemisphere is certainly better at intuition and some aspects of imagination, but it is also more intelligent. I don't mean just emotionally and socially intelligent, which it is, but cognitively intelligent. So when people's IQ drops after an injury to the brain or a stroke, when you look at what has been damaged, it's almost always the right hemisphere that's been damaged that has caused the drop in intelligence, not the left. That's kind of important, because it also attends better, perceives better, and makes more reliable judgments. So the idea that the left hemisphere might be boring but at least dependable is wrong. The left hemisphere is boring and absolutely not dependable. It is largely delusional on its own. It jumps to all kinds of improbable conclusions. I go into that in great detail. But that doesn't mean it's not useful. It's a useful servant, but it's not a useful master. It mustn't be the one making the decisions about where we go, what we do, and so on. But once the right hemisphere understands the direction, the values we should pursue, then the left hemisphere can be a useful servant in the sense that a bureaucrat or a computer can help deal with a lot of data fast, and that's helpful for pursuing the goal, but it mustn't be the one that decides the goals.
The word that's popping into my head is quality. That what you're
Very
talking
good.
about is quality, and the reason why I'm thinking that, because I feel, and your life's work this might chime or not, actually, to try and describe in words what each hemisphere does, you understand it because you can step back from it. I haven't. This is why I want to talk to you, because that's your experience. I can tell you about drumming in a rock band, and that's an experience unto itself, When you try and step back, I bet it feels like, I wonder if it feels like you actually cannot find the words to describe what these two things do, in the same way as we cannot describe what the art does once we describe it. And then if we look at human the culture of history of humans, you go back to the Greek myths, or the desire to paint the crucifixion accurately using perspective so we can understand the suffering of Jesus Christ, or the need to have Elvis Presley on television wiggling his hips and upsetting one section and not the other. All these things that art does which seem all unrelated. We can't actually put them into words, can we? There's it's very hard to describe, because I think this is what's affecting how people see, because everything in the arts, when you look at all the big stuff in the arts, it's a description of this thing you're saying. If I was to mention anything in any of the Bible stories, or the real big, the greatest stories ever told by human beings, seem to embody this. And what you're describing, and you could see I'm processing this at the moment, is the interrelation between these two things. Whereas in Western culture, we do see as they're adversaries, aren't they? It's the angel and the devil on your shoulder. It's Apollo and Dionysius. It's that's what you're up against. Now, I sent you I don't know if you've seen the 1930s All Quiet on the Western Front.
Actually, the film I haven't. No.
So it's an incredible film for 1930s. Very harrowing. It looks from the First World War from the Germans' point of view, and he basically loses every sort of moral belief. Everything he's been brought up and told, all that rigid dogmatic stuff, is just ripped apart by the experience of the First World War. At the end, when all his friends are dead, he's stuck in this trench, and he's sat there bored, and he sees a butterfly land, and so he reaches out towards the butterfly, and as he's reaching it for the butterfly, a guy on the other side spots him and shoots him. He's reaching out into the world towards beauty, and he's reaching out to something which he couldn't grab anyway. He couldn't. He couldn't have held. You can't hold a butterfly unless you let it. You don't hold it, you know. And so I've always felt that really embodies the sort of almost like the terror of being a human being. There is the dichotomy, you know, is that we want to reach out into the world, but the world is full of terrifying things, and many of us are frightened that they're going to engulf us. And so we cannot live because in reach, you know, and you could say he was right to reach out. I cannot answer it. I cannot explain it. But within that scene, I feel it explains something very profound, and you wouldn't expect it to relate to your very scientific description of how the brain works, but there's a relation there that's very difficult to put into words. That's all I'm saying, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. Several things really come to mind. One is that this is why there is poetry, and it's interesting that we think that prose evolved from poetry, rather than poetry being a peculiar embellishment of language. And that indeed they both develop from music, which of course has no words, but is profoundly expressive and can express quite specific ideas as well. So, and I discuss all of that in The Master and His Emissary. So that is one of the reasons why we need poetry and music and art and so on, unless we're to be, you know, profoundly stunted as human beings. And it's, you know, I'm sorry for people who think that all they need to do is observe the science and they'll get the answers. I spend a lot of time, as I say, defending science. I think it's incredibly important. I wouldn't have spent 35 years studying the science on this subject if I didn't think it told us something. But it can't tell us everything. There are things that are in a realm that is not irrational, but supra-rational, and that is not beyond experience, but is of the kind of experience that's terribly real, but can't be actually experimentally verified in a laboratory. So all of these things mean something to me. And I think the idea of the grasping of the butterfly is very, very important, because, of course, it is the left hemisphere's attitude to the world to grasp whatever it is it sees. And it's no accident that the left hemisphere controls the right hand with which we do.
Oh, sorry, that's incredible. That is incredible.
The grasping and the manipulation. It reaches out for things and wants to get them.
I did a video on this. I'm sorry to butt in, but I did a video on this. And when I did it, I said he reaches out with his right hand. And then afterwards I thought, I don't know what hand he reached out with. And so I watched it, and he did reach out with his right hand. So I thought, that's interesting. I chose it that he reached out with his right hand. I thought, well, the left side's controlling that. Surely his desire to move towards the beauty would be the other hemisphere. That it doesn't. I can't work it out. And I'm a sort of almost like dyslexic. It's really weird.
Okay.
It doesn't matter how many times I read which hemisphere does which. I can't remember. It doesn't matter. So this is why I'm not the left's controlling the right, so the left's like the dogmatic one. So you're saying it's the dogmatic one that reaches out for it.
Yes,
it's the dogmatic one that makes the mistake and gets shot.
Get this, because it not only controls grasp in the sense of controlling the right hand that does the grasping, but it also controls the part of our minds that say, I've grasped it. See, I've pinned it down. I've finally got it, put it in my bag of stuff, you know. Whereas what the right hemisphere is doing is always opening up to possibility, whereas the left hemisphere is closing down to a certainty. And of course we need both tendencies, but if the closing down to certainty becomes the controlling one, you get dogmatic atheists, dogmatic mechanistic scientists, and you get fundamentalist religious. But if the part that is humble enough to say we're uncertain, which good scientists always say, and just a little aside there, you're talking about physicists. What I love about physicists is that they're so much more advanced than biologists, because they, for 100 years, have been taking in the most extraordinary things that made them have to rethink the whole nature of physical reality. Whereas biologists have gone plodding on, oh yes, we're just mechanisms and the world is a mechanism. Whereas, physicists already knew that the inanimate world wasn't a mechanism, never mind the animate conscious world. So that's a very strange thing. And I find that as a result, physicists are delightful people to talk to. A lot of them approach me saying how interesting my work is to them as physicists. Explains a lot. Partly like your perhaps man saying it's something to do with the way we see the world, but I think it goes further than that. But in any case,
what's interesting there is that I mean, an English gentleman like you, a century ago, in your position, would have probably had lots of butterflies pinned to your. Yeah, I hope you don't now, but it's like a cliche, isn't it, that the English gentleman scientists would also, go around pinning the beauty of the butterfly.
Yes,
which you can't do it. It's like as soon as I used to think that as a little kid. I'm thinking, why do they do that? It's horrible.
Yes,
it's horrible because they're supposed to flit.
That's exactly it. And there's a wonderful poem by Blake that I know well, but I can't quote verbatim now. But it is about, the importance of he who kisses the winged joy as it flies lives in eternity's sunrise. He who tries to grasp that winged joy kills it, but he who allows it to carry on flying is irradiated by its beauty. So I do think, to come back to your original point, that beauty, I mean, I think there are three great, I want to say lures, Lures, but what I mean is not a bait in some way, but they're things that call to us, that summon us, that beckon to us, that make us want to respond to them. And they are the three Platonic virtues of beauty, goodness, and truth. And I think in my lifetime, I have seen all three of these horribly travestied. So suddenly pinning half a banana to the wall with a piece of duct tape is supposedly as great as one of the unfathomable, paintings of the Renaissance. Truth, well, look at what's happened to it. It's become a dogmatic adherence to a certain very special and very crazy political agenda, as far as I'm concerned. It has nothing to do with the truths of science or the truths of reason or the truths of experience. And, goodness has become a utilitarian thing, well, we just look at what happens and whatever it is, that's the best thing to do. But it isn't, it's in the heart, and beauty is in the heart, and truth actually is in the heart as well. The word truth is derived from the concept of being true to somebody. So if you're true to somebody, it's not that you have a fixed certainty in your mind, you have an allegiance because you see something in them that commands your respect, your faith.
There we go. There, in my lifetime doing art and music,
Andy, I can't hear you. Can you hear me?
That's fine.
There's no sound anymore.
Can you still hear me?
It may be a problem at my end. Let me just see. Come on.
Can you hear me now? Is it me?
I'll just check.
I'll just do a test.
So output. Input. Why does it do this? Halfway through something.
Can you not hear me now?
My sound. I can hear you now, but you know what? I set it up at the outset very clear, and it knows what it's doing. It's the input comes through this microphone in front of me, and the output goes into my ears so that you don't hear yourself coming back down the line. But at some point, without me doing anything, it will just randomly flick back to the wrong way around. So anyway, now
the thing is, one of the things that I've done 1,300 YouTube videos, and at some point I started to let all the mistakes in, and I started to believe that the mistakes were there because they had to be there. That there had to be a level of chaos in the video, because that was the only way of arriving at truth. You have to accept chaos, because it was like accepting this other thing. We're having a really good conversation, and that happens. You go, oh, and morality creeps in. We're like, oh, that shouldn't have happened. It shouldn't have happened. Now, as you were saying this, my experience, I believe that morals and ethics are not negotiated. I don't believe they come from God. They could come from God or not. I think that's another conversation. But I think human beings negotiate morals and ethics in art. That's what art does. I think, and the way that happens is that, for example, you said about truth as a virtue, and when you were describing the virtue of truth, I have come to the conclusion in a lifetime being a painter and a rock and roll drummer, that what you do with truth is respect truth. So when you said respect is a virtue that comes from truth. You have to respect, the scientist respects truth, which means when the machine goes wrong, we have to stop and make sure and use our rational mind. And that's what that little reminder was. That was us respecting truth. Beauty is we appreciate beauty, and that means that we have to learn to appreciate beauty. There we meet it. The great artist could only exist with the great viewer, someone who is there equal to the on the other side. And I think that's where our virtue ethics come from. And good is negotiated between those two. It's between the respect for truth and the appreciation of beauty, which we could call wisdom.
Yes, well, wisdom, I like it. Wisdom, of course, is another topic altogether, and quite what it is, whatever it is, it's something that this society is about as far from having as any that has ever lived, in my view. But there we are. But no, I think I agree with you, but I'd put it this way, that all things are relational. I believe that everything only comes into being because of a relation, and that relationships are therefore prior to the things that are related, which may sound rather difficult and odd. People might say, well, how can there be a relationship if there aren't things already to relate? But those things only are what they are because of the web of relationships in which they stand. So you need to understand something as part of a web of relationships. I sometimes use the image from the Vedantic tradition of the Hindu tradition of Indra's net, a net cast over the cosmos, in which at every crossing point in the net there is a jewel in which every other jewel is reflected. Such a beautiful idea, which suggests that everything is on a crossing point in a connection with a huge web. That's how I see things. So coming back to goodness, beauty, and truth, I see them as all three of them arising out of relations. So goodness is something that is appreciated in a relationship between the heart and mind of the one that wishes to do good and is received by someone else. Beauty, we've already discussed, is something that has to be both given and received, and becomes what it is in the interaction. So there isn't one. I sometimes give the example of a piece of music, which should be close to your heart, I imagine. So a piece of music, there is no one final version of it that exists. Every time it's played, it's slightly different, but not so wildly different that there is an obvious massive commonality between them. But the fact that it is being put forward by somebody different each time and heard by somebody different means that something new is now in the universe. So it comes out of relation as well. And so truth and goodness, truth also does, I believe, because again, this idea, I don't know if you've ever worked with a carpenter, but you hear them talk about two surfaces being true if they meet correctly. And they even say that they marry. And when people used to do the marriage service, they used to say they plighted their troth, their truth to the other person. In other words, fidelity. And fidelity is a relationship. So there isn't just a true thing out there. There is something that only declares itself through a truthful relationship. So these are the things that have gone wrong. And I think we need to get them back, because I don't know what you say about this, but you make a big claim for goodness, the beauty, that it is perhaps the foundation of goodness. And in the end, I like to think that these things come together. And I do have a divine view of the cosmos, and I think they do emanate from that divine ground, all three of them. They are aspects of it. But do you not get worried by the fact that sometimes there are things that are beautiful, people that are beautiful, actions that look beautiful, but are not good, actually? I mean, the prime example of this might be some of those colossally impressive gatherings, parades of the Nazis. They're in some ways
the Leni Riefenstahl film.
Leni Riefenstahl, beautiful beauty of what was going on, and yet it was profoundly evil.
I would argue that there is a profound beauty in what Leni Riefenstahl was doing in those films. And it would be interesting to have that discussion because it's nuanced and it doesn't chime with the sort of modern view of, morals and ethics, a sort of phenomenological, postmodernist view of that. They wouldn't have room for someone to see some good with the Nazis. But what we're talking about love and interrelationships and all these things that you would have to go there. But my definition of beauty is not like Marilyn Monroe or a rose. So if we take the banana, for example, taped to the wall, Marcel Duchamp, I think...
Half a banana, I believe.
Yeah. Marcel Duchamp was a bit of a genius when he stuck that urinal in the gallery.
He was a piss artist.
He was a genius.
He was the original piss artist.
I'm glad after we agree with you, we've found a place to... Because I believe his intention at that point in human history, 1917, was to give the educated elites something that would tie them up in an intellectual knot. This is what his intention was, leaving art to then be taken up by the people. And you then get jazz and you get the blues and you get cinema and you get all these things that the elites then take their opera, and they have sat there in their art galleries confounded by the question that Marcel Duchamp gave them, which is the fault of that sort of philosophy that has to go, but what is art? And what we're trying to say, we think we know what art is, and they'll go, you can't know what it's all subjective. If you like a piece of art, then that's great, and the same people will say that will be absolutely rigid about what we should say and shouldn't say and what we should laugh at.
Quite.
And so we see that. It winds me up because I know what's happening is these artistic aesthetic ideas of beauty that fueled the 1960s civil rights movement, which were beautiful, have now atrophied into an ideology which is actually against that beauty. What it is. So if you stand up against, I'm sorry for sound like I'm ranting, but if you stand up against that, you get accused of all sorts of things. And I know. Yes. I just want everyone to get on. I just want people to recognise the love that is in the creation of something and the receiving of it, and stop.
There's no room for finesse anymore. Everything is reduced to 100% totalitarian view. If you don't agree with me, you're a fascist and Nazi, whatever it is. Yeah. And that's just so idiotic and immature as a way of looking at things. It shows no sense of, well, it depends how much of something is good and in what circumstances and what it else entails and brings along with it. It can't just be consumed. This is a good idea and more of it is good. No, more and more of it can lead to total crap. And it's happening quite a lot of the time.
And also the joy of
hang on, I just want to finish. I just want to finish this. Sorry, Andy. Is that what happens is that you get an extreme reaction. And then people say, oh, they were extremists all along. But they've been goaded into a kind of perhaps extreme reaction by the kind of idiocy of this totalitarian way of thinking. It's called soft totalitarian, but there's nothing soft about it. Sorry, Andy, I just wanted to say that.
I can't. I mean, I've read your work, not extensively. I've watched loads of interviews with you. That's why I approached you. I mean, I've got a music channel. I'm not only talking about Hawkwind or, who's the best guitarist, stuff like this. But I've spent a lifetime at this. I find it fascinating that a rock and roll drummer that started off as a fine artist, that I can come to conclusion that when I talk to someone who's had your journey, that we are chiming exactly the same, because there is, and you've actually stated it here, there is a relationship between these two things. So surely the answer now for humanity is in education, and we have to work against this STEM idea of education, which is polluted by the postmodernist identitarian idea of truth. So when you've got that idea of truth and you're trying to create STEM students to go into science, I mean, how can that work? You're disrespecting truth from the outset, because you're going, what is truth all the time? What is art? What is truth? It winds me up. We have to educate our kids to be able to be creative, to explore, to appreciate beauty. And I'm on about appreciate a painting of an industrial landscape, or read a book about like the cancer patients. It's not about something being beautiful. It's beauty for me is the negotiation of quality in the world. That's what artists do. It's the negotiation of quality.
I like that, and indeed, coming back to Hemispheres, which we kind of have to, I suppose, one of the distinctions I make is the left hemisphere is only really interested in quantity. How much of this can I have? And the more, the better. Whereas the right hemisphere is interested in the quality of it. And in the modern world, there's so much that's gone wrong because we've stopped paying attention to quality and gone for quantity.
Totally right.
So I agree with almost everything that you've said there. And I'm very glad that we can agree about those things, but they do need to be negotiated. And that means that you have to have a reasonable conversation, and calling people names and cancelling them and so on is pathetic, frankly. It's childish. It's like a child having a tantrum and saying, well, I'm not going to talk to you. But if you've got a point of view that is defensible, then let us have a conversation. Let's try taking the other person's point of view seriously for a minute. And I think education is very important here. I agree with you that there's nothing wrong with the STEM subjects in themselves, but they can't be the whole focus. What about the humanities? The keys in the name.
Ruined. I was a lecturer in the humanities. I mean,
yes,
they've been ruined.
So was I. Yes, and they have been, but they need to be brought back in schools. And I do mean things like reading the plays of Shakespeare, reading beautiful poetry, and performing music, performing plays, learning about your history and the history of your culture. Because a person that doesn't know the history of their culture is cast adrift on the world. We are all, whether we like it or not, products of a culture, and we need to understand it, and understand it in a way that doesn't mean just passing judgment on it from a point of view that we happen to have in 2025, but trying to understand other people's points of view. As a psychiatrist, one of the things I've had to do for most of my adult life is the exercise of feeling what it is like to be this person. What does it look like inside this person? What is their world like? Because it's only if you can do that you can help them. And indeed, you can only have a reasonable conversation with people if you do that exercise. So I think in schools, people should be taught how to argue a case and then turn around and argue as well as they can the opposite point of view. I was taught that at school. I wasn't taught.
Well, that's what they chucked out, isn't it? That's what the critical theorists chucked out, didn't they?
Chucked out, and I think they should also be taught negotiation skills. It's not a difficult thing to teach, but it helps you to form bridges between people rather than form rifts and vilify and demonize people that you don't agree with. So come on, let's go back to a reasonable conversation, and let's say, yes, nothing is so good that everything and more of it and extreme positions that are damaging are good. I read a lovely thing very recently by a French theologian called Henri de Lubac, and he was a friend of Teilhard de Chardin, for people who know about Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, another great, very innovative theologian. But what he said is, charity without justice turns into a tyranny and demeans the humanity that it was hoping to exalt. And I see this happening. So charity, being charitable is fine, but it must be done with justice, not excluding people because they happen to be in a non-favored category, not diminishing them and banishing them because of that. But because that actually, if you have very low standards, as is now being bandied around for people of certain skin colors, what you're really doing is demeaning them and robbing them of the chance to meet a challenge and succeed, and then go to university and know that they're at Oxford because they're bloody good, not because they were part of a government scheme to boost numbers.
If we go back to the left hemisphere, how does that, what's the difference in terms of categories? Because I feel categories is an incredibly important thing we need to discuss. That you go right back to the beginnings of Greek philosophy, and they've got problems with categories, and Plato famously solves it with his sort of perfect realm. And so you have this idea of perfectionism, I think, that is then balanced by this sort of visceral, sort of punk energy, and we're often going, then. There's a categorical error in modern postmodernist thinking, right? And for me, it's the clumsiness of categorizing people on a hierarchy, that you're going to have certain categories and then you're going to link them to a hierarchy of privilege, which cannot be the case because we're individuals. And it's clumsy. It's sort of accurate, but it's clumsy. Is this
I suppose the argument
coming from the left hemisphere, this clumsy categorization?
Well, I think it is a bit, yes. But I mean, in defense of people who would take that position, they probably say, well, historically, there have been these categories and they have meant privilege and so on. So I don't think that they're wrong. But the question is what you do about that, and whether you think you can ever actually produce a society where there's no hierarchy and there's no privileges. Those examples of societies that set out with a rhetoric to do so have been some of the most steeply hierarchical, vicious and tyrannical societies that we've ever created. So, just because one criticizes those totalitarian communist societies doesn't mean that I think that capitalism is the answer to all our questions. Dogmatic capitalism and dogmatic communism are equally bad. And in the Master and His Hemisphere, I say, actually, they're both wrong because they're materialist philosophies, and that's what's wrong with them. And that is the mistake they make. And in the end, it's just like two farmyard dogs having a scrap over a bone, the same bone. So yes, categorization, to come back to that, is a problem, but it can't be entirely avoided. I mean, if we didn't have categories, we'd have to assess every single individual experience as something completely new. And if we did, we wouldn't survive, because we wouldn't go, a snake, I recognize a snake, that kind of thing. So both hemispheres actually do categorize. They categorize in different ways, and in the right hemisphere in a much more flexible way. The left hemisphere categorizes by possession of a certain one characteristic that defines them, whereas the right hemisphere categorizes by what Wittgenstein called a family resemblance, which is a much more subtle way of seeing things. Yep, this is rather like that. Not that this must be, there's this ridiculous church, not a church, I think a multi-story car park or a block of offices in Oxford, which has a spire on it, and why? It's stupid, and it doesn't make it a church. The left hemisphere is sort of like, oh yeah, it's a church, it's got a spire on it, but no. So what I'm
we've got a Sainsbury's like that in Wolverhampton.
Oh crap! So there we are. I'm sad to say, Andy, that I'm going to have to sign off.
Yes, I heard you're chiming. And all I can say, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I hope, me not being an academic, that you've got something out of it as well, because that's very
Oh, bloody
important.
hell. The best people to talk to are people who are not academics.
Well, how about this?
They have fresher minds.
Us artists, us artsy fartsy types like me, and you sciencey types, but although that we seem to have crossovers, like you said,
We
now
do
you've
have a
explained
lot
that
of
we
crossover,
aren't that, and we shouldn't categorize ourselves like that. But
No.
should we not be getting together a little bit more in terms of education? Do we need a unified
I do.
education system where someone is
Yes.
led out into the world and they appreciate the beauty, and then that is revealed the nature of things, which then can lead them to science, biology, physics?
Yes.
Because these things are powerful. And I've changed doing my channel because a lot of strange things happen, because I started to talk about art and love, and it's reached out, and I've spoken to some of my heroes, I've spoken to some of the greatest musicians in the world, and now I've spoken to you, and I think it's because I'm talking about something.
Yes.
And it's love.
Yes.
We're here, it's love.
I agree.
You said it as well. So I
Yes.
send you all the love I can, Dr. Gilchrist, and I'd love to speak to you
Yes.
again if you ever want to. Just give me a shout.
Oh,
I'd love
okay.
to have you on. I know you're a very busy man.
Well, no, but look, yes, and I want to return that respect and love.
I would love to talk to you about God.
Yes, I've written a lot about that in the Matter with Things, chapter 28. If you want to,
I will get
see
it
what
and I will read it,
say.
and I will let you go, because I know your time's precious.
No, it's
You're
okay.
a
I just want to
superstar
say-
academic.
Bless
Superstar
you.
academic.
I just wanted to say two things related to what you just said. The first is, I do think I didn't mention love as along with truth, beauty, and goodness, but in a way it is even more foundational than those, and they are manifestations of that core love, without which there is nothing. As Dante said at the end of his great epic poem, The Divine Comedy, love that moves the sun and the other stars. So it is central. And the other thing I wanted to say is, because you touched on the need to bring science and art together, which I think is very important.
That's the
and I
new
think
age.
also to stop the tendency towards silo-like specialization.
Totally. That's the conclusion I've come
In the
to.
middle of the 19th century, oh gosh, I've forgotten who he is now. Sorry, my memory for names has gone. But anyway, he said basically, when you only know your side of things and your case for something, you know very little of that. So, and I think a scientist who only knows this, and increasingly they have to get very specialized, doesn't see how it relates to everything else. And that's so important, because it's out of those relations that the meaning finally comes.
Well,
art is the same. So it has to make those bridges.
My conclusion is, and I'm going to say this in case you want to talk to me about this in the future, my conclusion is that we have to change our education system. And what we've got to do is let the teachers go in and teach, stop measuring it all, stop the left hemisphere trying to nail what education is, and let the teachers let the teachers teach what they think the class needs to know.
Yes,
that's
my teachers did.
Yeah, because the best classes I had when I was teaching music weren't about music. We get into a conversation, and I realised, just like you said, they got no idea of basic history. They didn't know when the Second World War happened. They didn't know when, the Industrial Revolution happened. And so just drawing on the board a thing and saying, there's the beginning of the earth. There's us now. What do you think's in the middle? And of course, I don't always know the answers, because I'm not, and we go and find it out. And we get like all this stuff happened. And then they'd realise how short we've been here. Human beings haven't been here for very long, and what we achieved. So I think we've got to let the teachers, and then you think, well, how do you examine? Well, just let the teachers. They know the students.
It's for another time.
Yeah,
this conversation.
I've got a feeling we would have a great conversation about that.
I think we'd have to have quite a long one. But
let's get out of here. So
thank you very, very much for having me along. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
I'm glad you did. That's the most important thing.
Good luck to you and your viewers.
Thank you.
I would just like to thank Dr. Ian McGILCHRIST for doing that, and the people behind the scenes that organised the interview. It went very smoothly. He was an absolute, I was a bit nervous, to be honest. You can tell, I'm not an academic. And talking to someone like that, I know my music, but trying to talk to someone, about the mind and its relationship to art and truth and beauty and all this type of stuff, I was quite intimidated. But I want to thank him. He made it so easy, and I enjoyed talking to him very much. And I hope he'll come back and we'll try and tackle the nature of education and God. And if you want to see that in the comments, you know what to do. Say that was very interesting. We want to see this. What would you want to ask Dr. Ian McGILCHRIST? I will ask it for you if we can get the chance to get him back on again. So, but what's most important is if you did like it. And if you want to see more stuff like this, subscribe, because you know that this is a music channel and this is a bit left field for a music channel. So I hope you appreciate this sort of stuff that I'm doing here and how important it is, an intellectual. It's not all about top tens and talking about silliness, I do all sorts on here. So you've got to appreciate it. Like I said, it's all about appreciating everything. You've got to appreciate things and respect things. You not get anything from the bloody interview. So if you want to show your appreciation and respect, you can like and subscribe, become a Patreon. You can, I'll make myself laugh the way I'm utilising this to sell my wares to you. But that's what it's all about. You could become a member. You could drop a bit of money in the PayPal tip jar. There's all sorts of ways of supporting me. So if you could do that, that would be very kind. Thank you for watching this video. That's it. We're done. You can go about your business now. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.